So I'm sure most of you are aware now, through the MEPA process and their anti-segmentation policy, we've incorporated both of these projects into one ENF. After that step, we'll be dividing it into 2 notices of intent, or NOIs. So this is the seawater system. Sorry, I should probably read off this so you guys can hear me. So after this step, after the state's made their determination, we'll move forward with the order of conditions with the Nahant Conservation Commission. We'll also be seeking Mass DEP's approval for their waterway license and the Army Corps of Engineers, which is the federal level. So in terms of construction sequence, again, this schedule is in a vacuum, not including any external pressures. Ideally, we would like to begin construction in the winter of 2019. Again, after consulting with our ecologist, their recommendation is that we wait until after migratory birds have left the area to begin any required site clearing. And then, I'm sorry, can you please withhold comments until the comment period? Thank you very much. So after that point, we will have all of the trees required cleared before they return back in the spring. So,
all right, can we hold comments till after the presentation's over?
thank you. After that point, we begin mass earth excavation and foundations, ideally next spring, commencing construction at the same time with an anticipated final grading and landscaping in the summer of 2021.
It just blows me away. I want to know really
how
we did it. 72 hours, God.
In early winter
72 hours.
That's tough.
in July
You said
2020,
200
and that is in
volunteers.
line with the
I think it was-
Fisheries and Wildlife time of year restriction. We're not allowed to be in the water from February to June, I believe. Right. So mitigation? Yes, sir. I believe we're withholding questions and comments till the end.
Excuse me. You're telling us about everything that's going to happen that you think people think is going to take place. You haven't even talked about the things that we're interested in and why we're sitting here, because we want to know how many people are you planning on bringing in here, how many stories are you going to have, how many cars are you going to try to park, and what's going to happen to our infrastructure in the town we can't take care of now because we live on rock and we can't dig down it deep enough. And if we're going to be bringing in buses loaded with students and so forth, we're going to have problems in this town. And you haven't even addressed one thing that we're sitting here and we're interested in. We want to know how many students you're going to bring in and what do you think you're going to do on the building height, because every other place you people have built, you have not met the standards that you said you were going to meet, and the people have been here before us telling us we can't believe a word you say.
Thank you. So again, if we could please withhold comments. Can we please get through this presentation? Thank you. Thank you for your comments, sir. Tonight's agenda is to focus on the state.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'd just like to ask folks once again to please hold their comments until after the presentation is over.
Thank you, Aaron. So we're here to help Aaron and the state understand the environmental impacts of this project. We understand you have your own concerns, but they have theirs as well, and we're hoping to address some of those this evening. So thank you. So for mitigation, obviously we've talked a lot about the habitat improvements. I'm sure you're all aware we've hired an ecologist. The majority of the site has been found to be an invasive species. We're proposing to eradicate those from our project site and undergo a responsible habitat improvement, which would create more biodiversity on site and create better areas for ecological improvement. In addition to that, obviously Briscoe and Rick have talked about the improvements to our stormwater system, which remove the pipes from Bathing Beach, pull the pump house. Oh, sorry, stormwater. Stormwater is now separated from seawater. I'm sure you're all aware. Currently, our stormwater is commingled with seawater and is discharged onto Bathing Beach. The stormwater will be largely dealt with on-site through a series of groundwater recharge systems and brought back to groundwater on-site. We have conducted 2 traffic studies, one last October and one a few weeks ago. We're still analyzing the data from the last traffic study, but the first traffic study, the results were included in the ENF. As part of this project, we're proposing to remove the existing intake lines and as we install new. As Rick had alluded to, we are proposing to install a lobster hatchery as part of the program for the new building, which would introduce about 90,000 stage 4 lobsters into Nahant Bay. In addition to that, we will continue to monitor all of our systems, our seawater discharge systems, to ensure compliance with state and federal regulators.
All right, so we're going to open it up to questions. What's that?
Sorry?
We're done with that.
We did go over that. The additional assistance to the town, we're currently in negotiations with town administrations, working out some additional assistance as they move through the permitting process as well. Thank you.
Yep, I just want to remind folks to be wary of the time that they're speaking. Try not to repeat questions so we can get the most meaningful discussion possible.
Okay, I'll be brief. So my first question is, well, let me just make an observation. I don't know if any of you live in this town, but you're telling us how we should live after you do this. 2, has there been an independent environmental review of everything that Northeastern's paid you folks to do? In other words, let me explain, because you're business people, I think. You're being paid by Northeastern to do something and to tell us what you're doing, and we're supposed to believe it. So 1,700 to 2,000 so about 75% of the town at least doesn't believe anything you say. Don't take it personally, okay? But it's the truth, so let's talk about the truth, because this lady, you need the truth. We don't want any expansion in this town. We put in a petition to the president of your organization. So my point here is, the first thing we want is an independent, non-Northeastern subsidized review of the environment, including marine, land, migratory birds, plants, everything you say invasive. I don't know anything about plants, but I know they're beautiful, and I want you killing them, okay? Our only industry is 17 lobstermen's families, and every one of them doesn't want you to do this. Every one of the only industry of this town, those people, okay, don't want you to do it, but you keep telling us about machines. You tell us that mussels are clogging your machines. We don't care. The mussels are clogging your machines because the mussels don't like your machines. So we're not morons, we're really smart, and despite what you think, we're gonna stop this.
Hi, I'm Bill Mahoney. I'm a lobsterman, among other things. So my first comment has to do with the size of the pipes again. And, 20, I thought there were 20 when I read them the other day, 14. Also, lobstermen, we suck in water on our boats, and we maintain them. When we get mussels in there, and we have a schedule to clear them, okay? And I think that would be a better thing. With your 6-inch pipes, you can still pull 600, is it 600 you guys want? Okay, last year they wanted 24. So the other thing, reading the MEPA directions are you people are supposed to be talking about end games. Is 600 going to be the amount you have in 10 years, or is this 10 weeks? Is it going to change? A sense of trust that hasn't been developed. Okay, next issue, I'm concerned with the freshwater, what do we call it? Yeah, freshwater zone, the wetlands right there. It appears on the ENF, you guys are going to build that pump house right next to it. And it looks like you're running pipes right through the wetlands. My kids we lived up there. My kids used to come back with salamanders for years, in the spring. Is it a vernal pool? It looks like it is to me. So that's a question that I have. And you people hired someone who didn't have the scope. Apparently you didn't pay him enough. He said, I can't deal with that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, the pump house, okay. Oh, Bathing Beach Cove again, you're going to put somewhere between 500 and 700,000 pounds of concrete in there to stabilize those pipes, according to the ENF. And nobody's going to be able to do anything but Northeastern anymore. You can't fish in there. People can't put their trawls in there. You're going to get all hung up. It's basically Bathing Beach Cove is Northeastern now, apparently. How many pounds do you envision to stabilize? Okay, it said 2,500. Well, it said 2,500 on your ENF. And it said 5,000 if you double them up.
Can you answer at the mic?
Bill, right?
Yes.
He asked how heavy the concrete blocks were that holds the pipes
And how
down.
many, too?
Yeah, they're about every 20 feet all the way out to the end.
Yeah.
And they're anchored with their weight, the ballast of the weight itself, but also with either helic or threaded rod that's embedded into the bedrock
Yeah.
to thwart the thrust of the surf zone, basically.
Yeah, you can see them at low tide now. You guys promised you'd take them out in 2011, and they're still there. There's 4 pipes in there, not 2 right now. There's 4 because you
Right.
never took out the pipes from 2006.
Right. Understood.
So that's why people are questioning you, because
Right.
you're not doing what you're saying.
Yeah. I think usually things like that are in what they call the order of conditions of the permit. If you abide by the rules of the permit, you said you were going to take those pipelines out, you can't get a permit granted until you remove them.
Well, they didn't take them out, and it was in the order of conditions in 2011.
I wasn't there, but I'm here now.
Okay. Canoe Beach, that's another issue.
Yeah.
Been noticing Freedom of Information. We retrieved some things from Coastal Zone Management. There's a 400 pages worth of material covering Canoe Beach. They tried it in 2016. Some of us old timers noticed, shook our heads saying that's not going to last, the berm. It did not. Lots of money's been spent, taxpayer monies. And again, from what I read with the MEPA recitation that I read 2 days ago, you can't segment projects. So Canoe Beach, what are you doing? You've spent 400 pages talking about getting an ENF, but it's not in this present ENF. And if there's financial involvement, you have to do, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, is it EIR?
So EIRs are required when certain thresholds are exceeded, or there's such thing as a discretionary EIR.
Yeah,
So
it says financial assistance. If financial assistance is given by an agency, i.e.
That's-
Coastal Zone
so-
Management,
That's considered a state agency action. So the criteria that needs to be met is that there has to be a state agency action and a related threshold. That's exceeded doesn't necessarily mean an EIR is mandatory.
my impression is that the state action, coastal zone management has been
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah,
And
you're
for the
correct.
life of me, there's velocity zones of 36 feet right off of Canoe Beach. And if you people are going to spend millions of dollars in your development, I've been around for 70 years. You get a big northeaster, you're in trouble in that area right there in that flood zone. So
Okay, and
it needs
thank
to
you
happen.
for your comments, and make sure you submit them to the MEPA office. But I want to be conscious and let everyone
Okay.
talk.
I love birds too, and you're going to rip up the whole area behind to the east of there, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
You're done. My name is Jeff Mussman. I live at 15 Tri-Mountain Road here in Nahant. I have two questions, one procedural and one highly scientific. I know that extension requests have been made by both the town and the Nahant Preservation Trust. Those extension requests were made as many as 10 days ago. In one case, we have 20 days, as I understand it, from Aaron to respond. Northeastern has been working on this project for several years. We haven't heard whether Northeastern has agreed, which is what I understand has to happen to extend the comment period. Tim, can you tell us where we are on that?
So the proponent has up until the comment period due date to request an extension. But as of yet, they haven't indicated that they were going to extend the period. I
Right.
don't know if you
So-
want to
right.
speak to that, Tim?
That both the
request
town
is-
and the Nahant Preservation Trust have requested that the proponent
The request is still under review by Northeastern Administration.
So 10 days ago, I think we can assume now that we're down to 7 days. It is not looking very positive that Northeastern is going to approve that extension, seems to me. And my highly scientific question is, how many people in this room, by standing up, how many people in this room, by standing up, oppose this building? It's hardly unfair, Casey. All right, now, how many Nahanters? Forget it. We don't need to embarrass Casey. Sorry.
Hi, Jeff Thomas, 16 Little Nahant Road. I first have a question. I'm unfamiliar with what the NU Coastal Sustainability Institute is. Can somebody tell me what that is?
That's the building that we're proposing to add on to the Murphy bunker.
Okay, so it's NU is for Northeastern. Can I assume that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's all right. Let me proceed. What I see here, somebody already touched on, is that I was expecting, and I think I'm not the only one, that we were going to interact with the Massachusetts Environmental Preservation Agency?
Policy Act.
Policy Act, sorry. And talk about what doesn't work for us. What I've seen so far tonight suggests to me that this is sort of a process of boiling the frog. No offense intended, but it just looks like a lot of reasonableness thrown at us so that we'll just sort of zone out and get into a white space and be reasonable and go right along with you. That is not going to happen. And, you know, the three of you who have spoken, you're all nice people, you're all good at what you do, but I think that somebody sent lieutenants or sergeants or corporals when they should have sent a general, a decision maker. Because we're not interested in hearing about what you want to do. We're interested in preserving this town. This town is virtually completely supported by individual taxpayer revenue. You know, we don't have a state and federal tax base like Lynn. We don't have a commercial base like Swampscott, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And right now, we're going to have to raise taxes to fix things like roads. Then it looks like we're going to see for the next 2 years construction vehicles destroying those roads. There was one construction vehicle down here tonight at the site which had the police had to block off a road, and it took 5 minutes with assistance of the police to get that vehicle around one corner so that it could get out. I can only imagine where the granite ledge is often a foot or 2 feet below the surface, what's going to happen when you have multi-ton construction vehicles going back and forth for 2 years. It's not only going to destroy the roads, it's going to destroy the character of the town, because the town is not going to be able to afford it. It's not just the animal habitat you will be destroying, which, by the way, if you chop down 10,000 trees or 1,000 trees and plant some new trees, that doesn't mean all the birds are going to come back and nest the next year. I don't think it works out. This is why, see, we're up against a wall here. We're not going to be like the indigenous people in Manhattan where you hand us $24 worth of trinkets. The selectmen are already negotiating, from what I understand, to accept $6 million over 40 years, which will amount to some fraction of 1% of our town budget, much less compensate for the damage or the other needs that we have. So I'll tell you, if this is going to come down to money, which it appears to be, that's what it's all about, because, let me use an analogy, our ability to pay for the sustainability of this town is not going to keep pace with the cost of the sustainability of this town, just the way that the ability of parents is not keeping pace with the increases in college tuition when it's costing $250,000 for 4 years. All money in Northeastern's pockets. So if this is all about the money, start thinking about a crooked number with 9 zeros in front of it. That might get our attention.
Hi, I'm Brendan Veronica Olmsted, 2 Summer Street, Nahant, Mass. I was watching at home, but unfortunately the audio is totally messed up so that no one at home has been able to hear any of this presentation. So you should be aware of that. In terms of actual public participation, it's only been the people in this room that have heard your presentation. I do have a number of questions, but I'm going to primarily submit them in paper. But there was a couple I did want to see if I can get a more immediate response. Given Northeastern took over the property in the 1970s, will there be an environmental investigation conducted to assess any residual contamination from the former military activities? Yes, no?
We will obtain any permits required by state or municipal agencies.
Okay. What level of environmental remediation efforts is Northeastern committed to should they find additional contamination?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
What level of environmental remediation effort is Northeastern committed to should they find additional contamination?
We're committed to whatever the state and federal agencies find.
Okay. Will there be geophysical surveys done prior to construction to determine if there's any subsurface anomalies, such as unexploded ordnance or burial pits from military activity?
We're going to have to consult with our engineers on that one.
Because you do realize that was gun emplacements, and they did have large artillery shells. And military, I've worked on a number of military bases, they have a habit of just digging a hole and burying stuff. So just want to ensure that you guys are checking for that.
Your engineer is here.
Now I'll skip to just a few of the other. Since I couldn't hear anything about the lobster hatcheries, this question may have already been answered. But as the local ambient water temperatures increase, local lobster populations are expected to migrate north. How is Northeastern proposed hatchery system going to compensate for change in species?
We've committed to what we've written down in the
Mid-Atlantic species would be moving up north, and our current species would be moving up to Canada? Because we are talking 20 to 100 years, our temperature is going to increase. Could you speak into the mic, please?
That's a very interesting question, actually. So, yes, as the lobster that are presently in this location move north and the lobster from the south move up, I think new broodstock would be brought into the hatchery that would be more adaptive to the environmental conditions as water's warm. It's happening. There's a lot of impetus to stop it, but I think that's a very interesting point that you just brought up.
But I would assume you'd have to anticipate at some point a change in species. So the system you put in now, you'd want to build it out in order to handle that compensation instead of having to gut it and replace it.
Yes, that is correct. So, I mean, the basic system of a hatchery is pretty much the same. It's about water coming in, manipulating the temperature to adapt to the species you're trying to maintain, and then and discharging it out. So it's adjustments in the environmental conditions inside the hatchery, which is pretty simple and it's not usually a gut job.
Okay. I'll move on to the next one. Given New England's weather forecasts can change dramatically in hours, such as the 92 no-name storm, what contingency plan does Northeastern have for housing and caring for students and staff should they be unable to evacuate Nahant due to a causeway flooding?
So if I could just keep the conversation focused on what the environmental impacts this building has.
Well, that's actually, the next point I'm asking about is, given the location of the building, is it going to be considered a sufficient safe harbor for all that students and staff? Are you going to have to evacuate from that spot and go to somewhere else in Nahant in order to be safe to ride out the storm until you can leave the island?
I believe it to be as safe as any other commercial property in Nahant.
That's not exactly. I'll get to the last two questions I have. From what I understand, there'd be a geothermal system potentially put in. Now, given that we are in a potential seismic area, what level of seismic mitigation has been anticipated, and whether or not, what level of, how many wells could you lose, or percentage of damage can the system take before you would have to basically replace wells, or abandon the system, or completely, gut the system?
So we are currently undergoing geotechnical analysis. That was what some of the trucks were up there for today, and that's going to be ongoing in the next few weeks.
Okay. Sir, my last question, the Department of Energy just in the last 2 weeks has released a study about geothermal potential across the United States. The New England area at about the depth of 7 kilometers was put in about 75 degrees Celsius to maybe up to 175 degrees Celsius. How does that temperature range impact the capacity of your system? Does it mean you have to increase the number of wells? Or can you meet the needs based upon the available heat capacity of the bedrock?
So again, we're still in schematic design for the system. We are currently evaluating. We're doing test wells probably later this summer.
Now, as you're doing those analysis, I think the last question I've got has to deal with the long-term impact. There have been a few studies in some Icelandic geothermal plants that have been operating for 20 to 30 years. In certain bedrock conditions, they have found they've actually decreased the heat capacity over time of the bedrock. Is that going to be part of your analysis?
Again, we're just beginning the design for that system.
Okay, well, I will submit in paper the rest of my remaining questions.
I'm Lynn Spencer. I live at 15 Tri-Mountain Road. I am speaking here as a longtime member of the Nahant Historical Society and as a concerned member of the Nahant Historical Commission. You've heard about concerns for ecological, environmental, geotechnical. I would like to speak to cultural concerns of this site. As you are very aware, the Murphy Bunker was built as part of the fortifications that protected Boston Harbor during World War II, and indeed had been started before World War II during World War I. So there is a long-time cultural significance to those bunkers and their relationship to the site. But you've also heard about reference to Manhattan and the $24 that bought Manhattan. Many of us in this room look at our town seal and realize that, in fact, Nahant was purchased or in exchange between Black Will and Thomas Dexter, who acquired Nahant. Black Will, like many Native Americans, didn't actually think there was land to be sold. Land was occupied, land was fished, it was hunted, it was a natural resource to be shared. So part of the story of Nahant, in fact, is long-time Native American occupation. So there's also a concern for archaeological resources. Is there any intention beyond the bunker? We understand you're building on top or beside the bunker, but as you look at the geothermal well areas and beyond, are you considering archaeological investigations?
That's a good question. That's a good and an important question as well, and I can tell you that currently the Massachusetts Historical Commission is reviewing this project for potential impacts on state-listed historic and archaeologic properties.
I appreciate that, and I know that to be a very intentional and deliberate review. Thank you very much.
Christian Baudo, 3 Swallow Cave Road. I want to talk about Northeastern's environmental record in Nahant. First of all, you guys have made it clear you think that place is up at East Point, it's full of invasive species. Well, it's just unlivable for anybody, right? Well, tell that to the 10 bird species which are on the Massachusetts list of special birds, endangered birds, species at risk. And I think if you go up there, you look at the record that's publicly available, you'll find a very robust record of those exact birds up in that area. I should also mention that there are invasive species up there. Guess what? You guys have owned that property for 50 years. If anybody was going to look after it and get rid of the invasives, it should have been you. I'd also like to talk about your seawater system. It's not your fault. In 2011, you guys put in your new pipes, and part of the order of conditions provided by the Nahant Conservation Commission was that the old pipes be removed, but they weren't. And this is what happened. In a storm last year, one of your pipes broke up. Here it is. Pieces of it washed up all over the beach, right in front of my house. My neighbors and I collected the pieces. We were very surprised and a bit horrified to find out that this is what Northeastern does in the beaches they study. They just let garbage lie on them. Relevant to the new application for the new seawater pipes, I'd like to know what's going to happen to the old seawater pipes. It says in the ENF they're going to be removed. What about the concrete ballast that hold them to the ground? They're all going to be pulled up, really? Honestly, I'm not going to find pieces of concrete washed up on my beach? Okay, I hope so. I'll hold you to it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marie Kaczynski, 36 Swallow Cave Road. And as a neurologist, a physician, and an academic teacher, I fully appreciate the value of scientific research. However, research needs to be done responsibly and should uphold the mission of the institution. So my question to the President of Northeastern and the Board of Trustees is how, as the leaders of an institution that claims to promote coastal sustainability, how in good conscience can you construct a facility that will destroy the very coastal environments you claim you want to protect? Consider the massive devastation the construction will incur on our town. It will require massive construction vehicles trucking in and out of Nahant over years. The bunker and surrounding area would be denuded of trees and foliage. It will annihilate the abundant wildlife, the natural habitats of the birds and all the wildlife in that area, as well as destroy the very fragile coastal wetlands. It also will forever desecrate the natural beauty of East Point. The increase in their carbon footprint is going to be enormous when you consider not only these massive construction trucks going in and out of Nahant over years, but the influx of cars and buses bringing students and faculties to our town. And not to mention, a 60,000 square foot building is going to require a lot of delivery trucks coming up regularly, bringing supplies. It's a huge, unnecessary carbon footprint when you think about it. Just think about the traffic. You're trucking 2 miles out into the Atlantic from the mainland, bringing this big carbon footprint out here. If Northeastern really wants to be a leader and a role model of sustainability, they would be mindful of their own carbon footprint, not increase it logarithmically. They would nurture the existing wildlife refuge and marine habitats of Nahant, not destroy them. True leaders in coastal sustainability would find an innovative way to perform their research that would not destroy one of the few remaining undeveloped headlands in New England.
Thank you. I'm Susan Solomon. I live at 5 Wendell Road, and my comments and questions really have to do with the basic one that follows up really on some of the things other people have said. Why a 55,000 square foot building is actually needed in a natural resource area seems to me to be the first question that we ought to be asking. And to do that, we have to look at the kind of information that we've gotten from Northeastern, which has been constantly shifting and changing. Among the concerns that I think have never been adequately answered is how many full-time equivalent FTE employees are currently using the space they have, and who and how many are going to occupy the proposed building in this very large square footage. And that's standard in academic planning. I'm an academic myself. It clearly bears on the traffic impacts on the town as well as all the environmental impacts. So if a much smaller building, perhaps in the existing footprint, would do for the needs as presented, we're dealing with a very different question. In the first set of FAQs that was sent in letters to Nahant residents, and actually is still posted on the web the last time I looked, probably after I give this speech they'll take it down. They first claimed that the 55,000 square foot building would serve only 36 new staff, 36 people in 55,000 square feet. My gosh, that is a ratio of square footage per person that is about 7 times standard academic figures in similar research setting. It's not a question of, hey, we're marine, we need all these tanks and stuff. That's not the issue. So after we posed that, and I just really want the lady from MEPA, and I apologize for forgetting your name, to know how much they've changed their numbers as this has gone on. It speaks to the dishonesty, it speaks to the disrespect for the town, it speaks to why there should be a third-party review of everything that they're telling you. After we pointed this out, they then upped their numbers with a very significant number of added students and a few additional staff. We've asked whether any of these staff and faculty that are already there are part-time. We've never been given an answer to that. We want to know how many FTEs we're talking about, full-time equivalent employees. We know from previous material you've given us that the students only come 2 or 3 days a week. So they're at best half-time. They should be spending some of their time in class. So from the research point of view, that might be a reduction. Also, it's clear from the material that's available that some of them are undergraduates who are only present in the spring semester, a further reduction in the FTEs. So when you factor all that in, the information that they gave us in their communication of January 31st, 2019, which was an answer to the questions we had posed, still does not give you a number of FTEs per square feet that has any relationship to what it should be for a building of that size. So then we wonder, well, what purpose does this building actually serve? Maybe it's not what they've been telling us at all. So since they haven't been forthcoming, we spent some time on the web. My friend Alice Cort and I have worked on this. And by reviewing their website, we learned that they've situated the Ocean Genome Legacy Project at Ocean Genome Legacy Center, OGL. And I'm not against that project. I think it's probably very good science. I'm an environmental scientist, actually, myself. I've spent my life studying the planet, so that's why I'm so surprised by everything they've told us. While it's a nonprofit, they have lots of collaborators listed. They collect samples sent in from all around the world, and they store them. So why does a storage facility have to be located in the smallest town in Massachusetts and within a nature preserve? Why don't you just move that storage off and use that space for the square footage that you need for any new activities that you have in mind? Unanswered questions relating to the ENF, in my opinion, are what's the purpose of the massive expansion? They've always talked about convening groups of experts and partnerships. We've asked, who are you convening? And what kind of partnerships? We've never gotten an answer to those questions either. What are the safety implications of receiving and storing marine specimens from around the world, including potentially invasive species, certainly, in a seaside facility with the possibility of increased flooding in the future? You know, we ducked the bullet on Hurricane Sandy, but it could have been here. How many people are going to be convened in this facility, including those who might participate in outdoor activities, outdoor parties, perhaps? And what would be the traffic and environmental impacts of all of those conventions that are going to happen in that outdoor space? How many partners are going to visit? How often? What's going to be the traffic and environmental impacts of those partnerships? We've never received any answers to those questions. We've also asked Northeastern why they can't expand in their current footprint to avoid despoiling what to us is a very important natural resource area. This is my last part. Their reply and the statement regarding this in the ENF, we believe, is disingenuous. They state, oh, the current building cannot structurally be added to. It can't support any additional levels. But you know, modern projects in other locations have been able to build up and over a structure in such cases. That's what they did at Mass Ioneer, for example. I urge you to call in a qualified third party to evaluate whether the project can proceed without despoiling wild spaces, build where they already are. We don't see an answer to that, and we want to know that answer. And we want to know the answers to who is going to be there, why is all this space needed. Thank you.
Hi. All right, so we have about it's 7:30 now, so I just want to remind people to be conscious of how much time they're up at the mic so everyone can get a chance to talk.
My name is Alice Cort. I live at 7 Valley Road. I've read the ENF statements. I went on the site tour today, and I have a couple of other comments. Very briefly, the geothermal wells, the seismic activity was mentioned. I had asked when we were on the site visit, how many geothermal wells are you going to be drilling? And then there was no answer, very vague. We don't know, we're going to look into it. and someone else said 50, 100, and the answer was less than 100. So this is clearly a part that is still under very much evaluation, and I think before there's a stamp of approval on this whole thing. My understanding is that East Point is one of the few places where an actual fault line is actually visible above the sea. So this geothermal well drilling will be presumably occurring right on a fault line. I was told, well, that wasn't really important for a lead project. And okay, I'm surprised, but maybe that's something to consider. What's the damage that's done of the stability of geothermal wells if they are being drilled into an actual fault line? Similarly, I found in looking into these things that East Point is also one of only a very small number of fossil sites from the Weymouth Formation, which is they are primarily Cambrian mudstones and limestones from about 530 to 525 million years old. And these are the earliest signs of life that my understanding is there are only a few between Newfoundland and South Carolina that are visible on the East Coast. This is the fossil record that's out at East Point, right where you're going to be drilling for your geothermal wells and the other invasion of the rock at that location. So my question is, have you had a geologist look into this? Is this something that's worth destroying so that you can do a project that we all have doubts that you need to do anyhow? I had a question. Mr. Mahoney had asked about the pipes for the water intake system. You showed us that 6-inch pipes have a maximum draw of 550 gallons per minute, and your goal is just to have a stability of 600 gallons per minute. And one question that had come up but didn't specifically get answered is, so you're putting in 2 14-inch pipes, or so with that pipe system, what I want to know is what's the maximum gallons per minute that can be drawn through those pipes in that pump system? Because clearly we have a lot of suspicion about once a pipe system and pump system is put into place, Northeastern will do what it did previously, which is activate 2 systems simultaneously to get what they want. You gave us in the ENF the average draw, but clearly there's a lot of range in that limitation. So if I started to do the math about areas of pipe surface and so forth, maybe it's a bummer that you have to clean your pipes more often, but that's what we all kind of have to do. So.
That was a good question. So basically the problem is what they've been doing is interrupting the research, right? So every 4 weeks or 6 weeks, they have to stop what they're doing and clean the pipes. It takes well, I'm just telling you how it is. And I admit, if you don't do it for a living, it sounds like it's not a big deal. But when you have living animals that you're trying to keep alive and you're trying to get data that means something either to your career as a grad student or a PhD candidate, that data is very important to you, all right? So you go out and get lobsters, that's important to you. Data is important to a researcher, okay? So being respectful of that. What happens with the 14-inch pipe is if you want to go all the way from the spring to the fall without disruption, so that's really the research season around here. That's when things are growing, the water's warm enough to conduct research. The pipe is slowly closing in by the mussels all that time. And the other thing it's doing, it's becoming very rough in there. That smooth pipe that you started out with, that nice clean area that probably had a lot more capacity in it in the spring, now has full of mussels, and there's a lot of turbulence, and you can't get the same volume of water.
Okay, but
So
that's
we
not my
planned for the worst scenario as that pipeline's being used.
Right, but my question really has to do is when you're talking about the studies that evaluate a 600 gallon per minute flow,
Yeah.
what is the maximum flow that you can create early in the spring when your pipes are clean? And are you studying the damage that that amount of flow is going to do to the environment?
Well, the pump, it's all ends up at the pump. So it all starts out big pipe, but then when it enters the pump, it all drops down to a very small size to enter the throat of the pump. So you might say, oh, well, you can put 1,500 gallons a minute through it. No, you can't. The limit is as you get into the restriction of the suction side of the pump. So it's really...
So you're saying that it's pump specific rather than pipe
No.
specific.
Okay.
So then if you change your pumps, then you get a different amount.
Well, thank you. I understand where you're trying to go with it, and you're trying to lead me in a direction, but...
Well, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I know that. So the pipe is sized to allow for amount of biofouling that occurs during a season.
That I get.
Okay. The pump is sized, and it ratcheted down from the early on request for like 2,000, 2,400 gallons a minute to 600, because that was what they were basically pumping now. So no net difference in between the existing system if it was operating properly and what the proposed system would be.
Okay, so what my point is that clearly there's a lot of distrust. So once you have your pipes in and the pumps are in a pump room and none of the citizens of Nahant can see what's happening in that pump room, what if your pump breaks and you say, you know, let's get a better pump. Let's get a bigger pump. Let's get a pump that can move more water, and then we can, do more.
Yeah. So
then we're stuck with 14-inch pipes that may be doing a lot more damage. So this is one of the concerns.
I understand
that
your
I
question
have.
and your point, but I think we're engineering it for a 600 gallon a minute system.
Well,
that's
I
what
know
we've been
that's
asked to do, and that's what we're providing the owner.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then my last point, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, it was completely different. What were you going to?
Okay.
We've committed to 600 gallons a minute, and we intend to honor that commitment.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that commitment, but I hope you understand, my last point has to do with Northeastern commitments. So Northeastern, my understanding is that when you purchased the land from the government in 50 years ago, you said it was for a marine science center, which is what's written in the ENF, but you also said that it was for a nature preserve, and for a great many years on your website, you touted that this was a nature preserve that Northeastern was taking care of for the town of Nahant. And that, interestingly enough, is not mentioned in your ENF topics that I read about. So when that happened, when you purchased it, Northeastern committed to providing scholarships as payment in lieu of taxes to the students of Nahant, a couple. It was decades before someone realized that Northeastern had not actually given any scholarships to anybody, and when someone finally said, they said, oh, nobody asked us. So they hadn't given us any. Susan Solomon and I wrote when Vice President Ralph Martin invited us all to write questions that Northeastern would answer, we had quite a long list of questions about what the actual compensation in monetary value or payment in lieu of taxes was to the town of Nahant. When they responded to us 6 weeks after they didn't respond to us, they never sent us a response, they sent a response to the town administrator with answers to some questions. They did not respond to one single one of our questions about what the compensation to the town of Nahant was during those 50 years. So with the various agreements or proposals that we're now currently hearing from Northeastern, so far, in your ENF, you say that Northeastern is committed to compensating Nahant for the work that is done or the compensatory damage or whatever during this process. But of what I've heard of the three proposals that have been listed, there was a proposal to give us payments of $10,000, first a one-time payment, and then something like $50,000 a year for 10 years. Then there was a proposal for like $115,000 for 30 years, and then
Thank
a proposal.
Sorry, can you wrap it up?
This is the end. The last proposal was for 40 years. So does this building go away in 40 years? What about all the damage that happens after that? And we've already been told it was only a small percentage of the Nahant payments. So we have difficulty with the commitments of Northeastern. Thank you.
Josh Shantaram, 267 Nahant Road. I'll be very brief because this was just discussed with Alice and the engineer here, but reading from the ENF, this is very ENF specific. Northeastern currently proposes a 600 GPM system, 75% less than the previously proposed capacity, which was 2,400 GPM. So when I look at a 600 GPM system, a suction side pump, low loss system, about 6 feet a second velocity. So consistent with your numbers, that a 6-inch pipe would be good. A 6-inch unfouled pipe would be good for a 600 GPM system. And I thought about the 2,400 GPM system. From your explanation earlier, I thought you turned one off, that kills off the muscles, and it doesn't interrupt the system or the research if you have two systems you turn on and off. So when I did the calculations for 2,400 GPM, it worked out perfect for 14-inch pipes. So at 5.7 feet per second. So pretty ideal. So my concern is, my engineering concern becomes an honesty concern about what happens in the future. When I look at a system that looks perfect for 2,400 GPM, admittedly unfouled, it's perfectly sized, and I look at the plans in the ENF of the pump building and see 14-inch pipes coming down, necking down to a 6-inch pipe, going to a little 600 GPM pipe on the floor. I said, that looks like it's set up perfectly for someone to come in and just put in a 2,400 GPM pipe, and it's done. Admittedly, changing the screening on the intake for your capture velocities and so on. So I'm suspicious about that what we have here is a 2,400 GPM system, and we're trying to pull the wool over MEPA's eyes or the public's eyes, or trying to avoid a permitting issue, EIR, or the one that Justin mentioned earlier. And when Bill Mahoney asked earlier, is it going to stay 600 GPM forever? You didn't answer. So these are my concerns, that it looks like an engineering solution for a 2,400 GPM system, and I'm concerned that it's a way of getting your foot in the door, and I think this MEPA application, if independent engineers agree with this, that the MEPA application should be for a 2,400 GPM system, not a 600 GPM system. That's all.
Hi, my name is B. Rogers. I don't know that it matters. I live at 44 Pearl Road. And I actually have a question about the way these plans are moving forward. I think I probably should be looking at you. About a year and a half ago, Northeastern made a presentation of a building proposal, and there was quite a lot of negative reaction. I've heard that 1,700 signature petitions cited numerous times, and I think it was as a result of that presentation and that building, I signed it. I would not sign it today, and I might not be the only person in that position. I might sign a similar petition again depending on how the building developed, and I guess that's my question. From that first presentation to one a few months ago when the ABC choices were presented, there had been really a lot of mitigation and reduction of the footprint and so on and so forth. I've heard a lot of comments about this is a schematic, we're still pursuing it and stuff. Is there some point at which MEPA or any of the other permitting authorities at the federal, state, local, will have a definitive design that will be judged. So we're doing the studies, which of course need to be done. Is there a point in that process where there will be a specific proposal that people can respond to? Because obviously how people react, as I said, that, early petition might not have the same number today, it might be changed in the future. And I'd love to know at what point is there, it's this many square feet above ground, it's this many square feet of mechanicals and stuff, it's this, and so on, like that. So that's my question. It's about the process.
So MEPA review is intended to be done in the preliminary stages of planning, so that the public can participate in it and offer their opinions on reasonable mitigation or alternatives. So if a project changes drastically, if there's a material change, there's language in the MEPA regulations that require the proponent to come back for a notice of project change if state permits haven't been issued for the project yet. So for this project, it needs a Chapter 91 license and a potential superseding order of conditions. So those are the two state permits, and that's really where our jurisdiction lies. So if an aspect of the project, like the seawater intake system or the building, changes significantly from what it was reviewed as, then it may need to come back for MEPA for further public disclosure and review. But typically, the changes between MEPA and the permitting process aren't that major. But there are, it's MEPA, the purpose of MEPA isn't supposed to, it doesn't have a final product. But it makes sure that the project's in decent shape to get permitted. That it identifies those outlying issues. Right, and a lot of issues can be dealt with the permitting agencies, but the permitting agencies only have so much authority because they're permitting specific things and not the entire project itself.
My name is Jim Walsh. I live at 33 High Street in Nahant. So it was nice to have you here, Aaron. I understand this is the first time you've been to Nahant. Maybe right now in a kind of a warm room, it's different, but earlier you were up at East Point. And I think you've probably got a sense of what we value. Our friend over here said that what he's here to talk about is the building, the impact of the building on East Point. And for us, a lot of it is not so much that impact, it's the collateral damage. It's the damage to other aspects of life in this community. I'm going to recommend a book for you. Do you know Jane Jacobs? Do you know that name? No. There's a book called Visionary Women, and one of the visionary women that is talked about is Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs lived in Greenwich Village, New York. Manhattan was mentioned earlier. She lived in Greenwich Village at a time when Robert Moses, a very powerful guy, decided he wanted to put an 8-lane highway right through the center of Greenwich Village, right through Washington Park. And she organized her community and said, our community is more important than your concrete and steel. We need to preserve us as a community. And I think this is a legitimate concern. It's certainly a concern that we have here. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, we had a big meeting here. And the architect for the building, he announced he was from Marblehead. He understood what our concerns were. And I asked him, I said, you know, if somebody wanted to put a 55,000 or 60,000 square foot building in the middle of Old Town in Marblehead, where would you be? Would you be up there or would you be out here? He didn't answer me. I don't know why. But, right. But it's clear to me that you've had an opportunity to see the natural conditions. You've had an opportunity to see the human element here. And I hope that you will support the fullest possible environmental impact report. And so any decision that is made will be based on information that is very clear, very detailed, and can sustain the kinds of questions we've asked. Earlier, people had asked questions, and they were never answered. Or answers came back, and they were shifting. So that's who we are. We're in Nahant, and I'm glad you're here, and I hope you learned something. Thanks.
Hi, we're that third-party review you've been talking about. We have been retained to take a look at the documents, and I'm Ginny Roach with CDM Smith, and Magdalena.
Yeah, Magdalena Lofstad. I'm a wetland scientist with CDM Smith.
And so I'll talk first just a little bit. I mean, we haven't had a lot of time to look at this yet, but, and therefore the comment extension would be wonderful, but I'll touch on some of the civil engineering aspects, and Magdalena will touch on the wetlands and permitting. So one thing is inconsistencies of information in the documents, particularly with regard to impervious area and stormwater management. And just looking at some of the plans, I went to scale some of them off. It appears that some of the measurements, like the sewer length and some of the impervious areas, say for the parking lots alone are much bigger than the impervious areas. So we'll summarize those in our comments. The impervious area due to new building the increase is listed in the stormwater report as 37,000 square feet. And we've been throwing around 55,000. Now, if you were including the bunker as the impervious area, we were told today that it has 8 feet of soil, and I saw all the vegetation and trees. So I think that's up for discussion. At the back of the stormwater report, there's in red that the final stormwater report will have the geotechnical information, and I assume as a result of what you were doing today. There is concern about doing stormwater infiltration, which is a big part of your stormwater quality treatment. The northernmost parking lot infiltration system is in a rock outcrop area. It's listed as that under the natural resource soils information. So we would like to see how those results came out, because that could be a game changer on the stormwater system. Maggie, you want to touch on?
Yes, there's a lot of inconsistencies and conflicting information in the environmental notification form. One, for instance, which is very significant because what they're proposing now is not permittable under the local wetlands ordinance. The zone AE is mapped as elevation 13, and also keep in mind that that was lowered from 2014 by a LOMAR that was approved in December 2017. It used to be 15 feet up until the LOMAR was approved, and now it's 13 feet. So the effective FEMA map listed as 13 feet. But what they did is they imported GIS Zone A layers. When you're actually supposed to trace, they have more detailed survey than the FEMA mapping. So they're supposed to trace elevation 13, which actually brings that whole bowl where the BVW is, that is actually land subject to coastal storm flowage. So if you add a 100-foot buffer zone to that, the southern parking lot is in the 100-foot buffer zone to land subject to coastal storm flowage. And under the bylaw, they only allow 5,000 square feet of impervious within land subject to coastal storm flowage. And what they're proposing is close to 19,000 square feet, so it's not permittable under the bylaw. That's one comment. And, you know, we are submitting a very detailed letter where everything was be with mapping so you can clearly see the inconsistencies. The other thing was a gentleman earlier brought up the segmentation issue with Canoe Beach. And I have some serious concerns about that as well, because, I mean, I don't know, maybe these gentlemen can tell us, you know, what's the status of the restoration of Canoe Beach. But one could maybe anticipate or speculate that, you know, if they're using some kind of hard armor for the coastal bank restoration there, that would require a variance under the Mass Wetlands Protection Act. Maybe they're not, I don't know, but there's like, I think that should be answered as part of this ENF. Like, what are they proposing to do? We know that the restoration, the beach nourishment failed. What are they proposing to do? And there's an existing pipe that discharges to Canoe Beach, and they're tying in the stormwater from the northern parking lot, it's treated stormwater by the infiltration system, into that outfall. So I think that there's a real, actually tangible connection. You can touch it. I mean, a variance to the Mass Wetlands Protection Act requires an EIR. It's a mandatory EIR threshold.
My name is Tom Hamilton, 17 Kenny Avenue. These are going to be a little anticlimactic questions, but I have two major concerns. One is on the intake system. I did a little research on the computer, and it looks like there's systems out there that would have no negative effect on larvae or fish eggs or anything like that. I mean, it's not my area, but I think our expectation would be that whatever you do, it's world-class. And just wondered if those were investigated and feasible for this area. The other is I see some RFPs out there for invasive species, and wondered if there's an order of conditions that limits your work with invasive species, and if the discharge might have a need for some kind of residual control or something. Yeah, just those two.
I apologize, but I kind of misunderstood the first question, but the second question on invasive species, research on invasive species, that's a very controlled and regulated sector of research. And under the permits, there would be a, what do they call it? A procedure in which they can hold them, control them, and make sure that they don't escape into the environment. They have to write that all up as part of their research project. So, I think they do that currently as a way of operating the research right now, but certainly would be held responsible for that in this permit. And I forgot the first, I apologize. Yeah, so have I. Yeah, and the problem is the biofouling of intake. So I've seen those structures, they're permanently installed. We all know, if we know anything about the bottom, that the bottom is full of life, and so seaweed, mussels, barnacles, sponges, tunicates will all grow on something that's permanent. The way my design is, it's like a cartridge. They'll dive on the cartridge, remove it from the seabed, take it up on the boat, and bring in a fresh one. So that will be done every time the things are changed out. The structure you're talking about is permanent, will foul, and will probably only have a short period of life. So it's pie in the sky stuff, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd be using it. Is that okay? All right.
My name's Ann Spurn, 36 Mayolas Road. I'm a professor of landscape architecture and planning at MIT. I've been studying, working in the area of sustainability for over 40 years. Sustainability is more than environmental science. It's about the larger sustainability of a society, in this case, a community. Northeastern proposes to set up a Coastal Sustainability Institute. And we feel in Nahant that our sustainability as a town is at risk as a result. So, I think you should think very seriously about this, because any institute founded on such a contradiction is really, sustainability is a set of values. It's not only about science. And like others have mentioned, we have an infrastructure system. We're a very small town. Our tax base is from our individual property taxes for the most part. We have an aging infrastructure, and we have big problems with our sewer and water lines. And we are really, really concerned about this aspect of our sustainability, as well as our environmental sustainability. So any institute that claims that it's a coastal sustainability institute needs to think more broadly than about marine science or environmental science. And that brings me to another point. My colleague, Susan Solomon, raised the issue of what is the 55,000 square feet going to be used for? Because she undertook a study of the Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Department at MIT, her own department. And this far exceeds the entire space allocation, as I understand it, for her department at MIT. So this leads us to question, what is the 55,000 square feet going to be used for? I think all of us have had a good relationship. Well, maybe not all of us. The lobstermen, I hear the concerns of past issues, but many of us go to the open houses at the Marine Science Center and have enjoyed colleagues there and going there and seeing the inside of the bunkers at the annual open house. And I don't think that we really have any great concerns about a small enlargement to have a Coastal Sustainability Institute there if it were, you know, seemed like a reasonable amount of space. But this seems totally unreasonable. And you haven't answered our questions reasonably about what you're going to do with all of this space, given how totally out of whack it is with academic standards for the use of research space and teaching space. So I think I'll stop there, but it's just, there's a contradiction here that's really irks me as someone who has worked on sustainability for so many years. To found an institute like this on such a contradiction doesn't bode well.
Thank you, John Lombard, 14 Fennel Way. I'd keep the birds, and I wouldn't cut any trees down. I think the location is wrong. What you should do, take a footprint of what you have up there. The trailers, take a footprint of that. If it's 15,000 feet, put 2 floors in there. Have it looking right at Egg Rock. And I'd take a picture of the chapel and the library. And that would be the exterior of the building. And put Northeastern Marine Science facing that, put a parking lot up in front or whatever you have to do, and call it a day.
Bruce Walker, 7 Valley Road. I have a question for the architect, and that is, it was good to see the drawings of the buildings there. The question is, are you designing those buildings such that a second story can be put on top of them, and have you been requested?
I just have one request, and that is that I think you should poll your students. I think you should poll the people who actually you're building this school for, because they're the younger generation. And there's one thing I know about the younger generation: they get it. They get it about environmental destruction. And I would suggest to you that they would probably say, we do not need 61,000 square feet of a building.
Hi, Debbie Vanderslice, 368 Nahant Road. I'm going to stay on point. I'm going to be very brief. One thing is an observation for Northeastern. I know you have said and published that the water temperature that is released is not too warm and that it doesn't impact sea life. But I can tell you from my personal experience of my husband and I cleaning that beach for swim for several years now, that when we started cleaning it, we found lobster shells, crab shells, blue mussel shells, lots of them. And I can tell you now, we're lucky if we find 2 shells, 2 blue mussel shells. So you may say it doesn't impact the sea life there. I know you're the scientists and the smart ones, but from my personal experience, I am not seeing any signs of sea life, just a lot of garbage. So. The second thing, and this is relevant to the building, perhaps for the architect, I read recently that with buildings such as the bunker, that there's issues with asbestos, that the military, at the time that that bunker was built in 1942 to 1943, was using certain concrete that has asbestos in it. It is not easy to test for. It's not a deliberate thing where you can just take a chunk of concrete. It's more expansive than that. It may be a different kind of material in the ceilings, etc. So I'm thinking if you're adding another level, you're gonna somehow have to cut through the concrete for stairs or elevators or whatever. And I know that if there indeed is asbestos there, I'm hoping that you're gonna test for it, because if there's a southeast wind, I'm pretty sure it's gonna blow my way. And then there's others, beautiful children, that live around the corner in a different direction. And obviously asbestos causes cancer. This is a 1 square mile town, and I think it's something that should be looked into and tested for.
We will have an industrial hygienist on site during demolition, and that's common practice in construction.
Who on site?
An industrial hygienist
Who does what?
who tests materials.
Okay, so before you actually start drilling, are the materials tested, or are you gonna wait till you're blasting away?
So that could be destructive testing, and we're just not prepared to do that right now, but certainly as we get closer to the actual activity, we'll bring in those professionals.
Okay, and I really do hope that you start like a Facebook page or something so that you can communicate to residents some of these things we've been talking about tonight. So as things evolve, as you meet our concerns or don't meet our concerns, that we have a way of knowing. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Briscoe's gonna put my contact information back up on the slide, so I suggest you submit comments, preferably electronically, to me via email or the MEPA public comment the MEPA public comment portal. Those are the best way to submit the comments. You can also submit hard copies to the address listed up there. Thank you.